So this guy is about to try and overthrow the US government. Now the guy's name is Huttle. Huttle's 41 years old, living in Indiana, and he's kind of a turd. He's been in and out of jail a ton of times. He's got 7 DUIs. He went to prison once for a couple of years for leaving bruises on his own kid. Bro is just a nightmare. But one day in 2021, his whole life changes. Because his uncle comes to him and he's like, "Hey, wanna overthrow the government?" Now his uncle is this guy, Uncle Dale. And Uncle Dale's 73 years old. And he wants to travel over to Washington, D.C., where the president is going to give a public speech to a bunch of his supporters. And Huttle, he just got out of jail for like a DUI not too long before this, so he doesn't have anything better going on. And so he's just like, overthrow the government? Alright. And so they drive 10 hours from Indiana all the way over to Washington, D.C. So they get there and they go to the Ellipse, which is a park right near the White House, to hear the president speak to his supporters. Here's the thing about the president, though. 2 months before this, he had run for re-election and lost. And he's apparently still all salty about it, claiming it was rigged and it's unfair and it was stolen from me. And now he wants to interrupt the certification of the votes, which would create chaos and allow him to remain president for a period longer. And so on this day at the Ellipse, during his speech to a bunch of his supporters, he basically instructs all of them to march down to the Capitol building and protest and disrupt the certification of the votes.
And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down.
And so Huttle and Uncle Dale hear this, and they're like, "Oh, the president's going down to the Capitol building? Well, hell yeah, let's go with him." And so they and a huge crowd of the president's supporters all start marching, and they walk about 2 miles until they reach the Capitol building. And of course, the president doesn't go there with them. Like, he's full of shit. He probably just went back to the White House to watch TV or something. Like, he just wanted his supporters to go down there and be disruptive, which they do. And by the time the crowd gets there, Huttle and Uncle Dale are there. And there's Uncle Dale on the left and Huttle right there on the right. And they start talking about wanting to get inside the building and arrest members of Congress. In fact, Uncle Dale's exact words are, "I think we ought to bum rush the Capitol building. Arrest them all. We've got enough people to do that." But here's where shit gets crazy. This big-ass crowd surrounds the Capitol, and they really surround this place. Like, they take it over, and things escalate real quick. And suddenly, boom, the crowd overruns the police there, and you can see them pulling a protective barrier away from police here, and again right here. And soon, people start climbing up the side of the building, and they're climbing up the walls, which is weird because they could just take the stairs, but I don't know, I guess they really want to climb. But anyway, the whole place erupts into a riot, and it's absolute chaos. And Huttle and Uncle Dale, they join in, particularly Uncle Dale's 73-year-old ass. He starts getting into it with police, getting in their faces, yelling at them, calling them things like traitors. He grabs one cop's baton and tries to wrestle it away from him. Luckily, he fails. He also grabs a flagpole that he's got, and he starts jabbing at one of those police officers. There he is right there, and one of those police officers ends up getting hurt. But then the chaos continues, and kaboom, the crowd starts forcing their way into the Capitol building, and they storm the place, and they're all chanting like, "USA! USA!" like it's the fucking Olympics. And of course, Huttle and Dale follow the crowd in, and this crowd is looking for members of Congress, potentially to harm them. And they're like entering offices and private conference rooms, shouting about how this is some kind of revolution. Here's the thing about Huttle, though. I don't know exactly why, but he's been filming this whole time, filming all of this. And so at this point, he turns the camera around and points it at himself and says, "This is me," which is definitely going to incriminate him later. Anyway, a few minutes after, a bunch of police officers show up to where they are. And to get away from them, Huttle leaves the building by climbing out a window. Now, after all this chaos, nothing happens to Huttle or Uncle Dale that day. They eventually go back to Indiana. While the certification of the votes, ultimately it does resume, and the president officially loses that election, and he has to give up power. Womp womp. And so his disruption plan failed, and the mob rioting the Capitol ultimately did not get what they wanted. And also, 174 police officers were injured that day, and a few died later of causes that are said to be related to this day, but that's a whole different story. Regardless, Huttle and Uncle Dale move on and they go back to living their lives with no consequences. Until... Here's the thing. Mobbing the Capitol to interfere with an election is not only against the law, but it's a pretty big deal. And the feds are not gonna let this slide. And so, boom, they start investigating, and they have tons of evidence to work with. Witnesses, cell phone data, the Capitol building has security cameras, not to mention a lot of people there that day were just filming the whole thing, so that's evidence too. And so, one by one, they start arresting people involved in this. And ultimately, over 1,600 people are charged for their role in what happened that day. And over a year later, the feds finally catch up to Huttle and Uncle Dale. And of course, they've got all of Huttle's footage he took to use as evidence. And so, bam, they arrest them. Here's Huttle's mugshot. And I couldn't find a mugshot of Uncle Dale, but here's a picture of him as well. Now, Huttle gets sentenced to 6 months in prison, while Dale gets 2.5 years in prison. But wait, it's not over. It gets even more insane. Because in 2024, Huttle finally gets out. He served his time, and he goes right back to living his life. The following year, the former president gets back into office again, and he decides to pardon all 1,600 of the people charged or convicted for mobbing the Capitol that day. Because they helped him out by trying to disrupt the vote counting, and so now he's helping them out. And so Uncle Dale, I guess, he gets out of prison. He's pardoned. I couldn't really find much more on him. While Huttle is already out of prison, but his crime from that day is wiped from his record, so, I'm sure he's happy about that. But then, about a week after he's pardoned, shit really goes south. Because Huttle is in Indiana, and he's driving along one day, and he's speeding, going 70 in a 55, and he flies right by a cop. And so the officer puts his lights on, and he pulls him over. And Huttle gets out of his van, and they start talking. Now, all Huttle was doing is speeding, which normally isn't that big of a deal. However, he's had a ton of traffic violations, and now he's driving with a suspended license. And now it's like a felony status at this point. And the officer explains this to him, and he explains that he has to place him under arrest.
So today you are going to come with me.
Well, I can't.
You're going to have to, okay? You're going to come with me today, all right?
No, I can't go to jail for this, sir.
But then the officer goes to arrest him.
What I'm going to do, all right, is I'm going to put your information right here for a sec. I want you to turn around and put your hands on. Don't you do it, buddy!
Now, I gotta pause the video here. I can't show you what really happened because, it's too violent, but I can explain it to you. So Huttle jumps back in his van, and he reaches somewhere, and he grabs a pew-pew that he has. And the second he grabs it and holds it up, the officer grabs his, and blam, 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 blam! He unalives him. And now Huttle apparently did that because he was going to unalive himself so that he wouldn't have to go back to jail. And obviously when you suddenly pull out a firearm like that in front of police, they might shoot you, thinking that, you were going to shoot them, which is exactly what the officer did. That is wild.